Hello and welcome to ClockTower Game Studios. Today we're going to be demonstrating how to use glazes and how to mix glazes, and we're going to be using these Bombshells miniatures Edofleini models from their game Counterblast. Now in these models I've gone through and I've underpainted them, which means that they've been primed, then washed so the area is darker underneath them, and then they've been dry brushed to bring out the highlights. And now I'm just showing off the materials that I'm going to be using to mix my own glazes. I've got some matte medium and then some flow medium. And then I've got some paints and some inks that I'm going to use as well. So to start with, what a glaze is essentially a thinner paint. It's somewhere between a paint and a wash, and I'm going to be using a wet palette to help maintain that kind of in between, and so I can test it before putting on the models. The first glaze that I'm going to be mixing up is going to be a brownish green color for the tentacles. So I'm going to go ahead and start with some yellow and green, and it's kind of a khaki-ish sort of beige yellow. It's a little more on the darker side, more than the bright lemony color of yellow. And then I've got some dark green. So as I was mixing this, I found that the dark green is really overpowering, and it takes a lot of the yellow to kind of counterbalance it and get it to the right sort of shade that I wanted. So once I get started, I'm just going to keep adding the yellow until I'm happy with the color that I've got. And one of the things that glazes is really good for, a couple of the things rather, is they're great for organic shapes like these tentacles or other flesh. They're also great for cloth or anything that has more of an organic flow to it and that's more natural, so it doesn't have one consistent color. So skin tone, it's kind of different on different areas, and glazes, depending on how you mix them, the thinner they are will work almost like a wash, where they'll flow into the deep recesses and give some shading. But when they're mixed right for what I'm trying to do, they'll leave a little bit of that on the surface, so you've got sort of a two-in-one effect where it paints the top layer, but at the same time it does give a deeper shade to the deeper recesses of the model. So far all I've added is ink, which has a really thin consistency and will run like a wash and is really heavily pigmented. So the next thing I need to do is kind of thin this down and make it more of a more towards an actual paint as opposed to an ink. So the first thing I'm adding is some matte medium, and why I'm adding this instead of water, why I'm using medium in general instead of water, is that it maintains the consistency and keep the paint from what's called breaking, which is the point where it doesn't hold its consistency at all. It starts to kind of flow almost more like a water, and the pigment starts to separate out. This will sort of prevent that. Having a medium that the pigment can flow in kind of helps alleviate that to a degree. So here you can see I'm just testing my consistency, seeing where I'm at. It's still a little thicker than I wanted, so now I'm going to add some flow medium. At this point, I've just made a paint. It works almost just like any other paint you'd use. So the flow aid, what this does, this is how you get that effect where it'll start to run into the deep recesses. So now I'm just making sure it's all mixed in nice and evenly blended, and now I'm testing the blend on the paper towel. So what I'm looking for here is, unlike a paint stays where you put it on a paper towel, especially when the paper towel is dry and new, whereas when the consistency I'm looking for is achieved, when you put the paint onto the paper towel, it'll almost soak into it, more like the paper towel's absorbing any other thinner liquid like water or something like that. So now I'm just mixing it in. I'm testing it on my wet palette a little bit to see if I've got the right consistency, and there I'm going to go ahead and add it to the paper towel. So there you can see it's transparent, you can see through it, and it kind of holds its shape. The puddle doesn't contract or anything. This is a little more green than I had originally planned, but this character, the model that I'm painting, is the leader, so that's where I'm starting. And I'm just using a soft bristled, big kind of junk brush for this. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. And now I'm just going to paint over all of the areas where I want this green skin tone to be for the tentacles and around his face. So I'm just going to paint that in there, and I'm going to do my best to keep it from pooling too much. And as I'm finishing up, you'll be able to see that the higher, lighter areas of the model stayed very visibly bright green, while the darker shaded areas were a darker green, and that's how the glaze is supposed to work. Now for the next models, I'm going to be mixing in a little bit of this khaki from Army Painter's Flames of War paint. I just didn't quite get the dark brownish kind of khaki green that I wanted, so I'm adding a little bit of this to kind of bump that in the right direction. Now this is going to thicken the paint up a little bit, so I'm going to end up adding a little more flow improver as well and mixing it all in and make sure I get it to the consistency that I want. And once that's done, I'm just going to go ahead and paint out the rest of the underlings for these guys. One of the biggest advantages to this type of painting and using glazes like this is the speed that you can achieve a decent result. So I did all three of these models, and doing all three of them, just being careful not to get the glaze anywhere I didn't want it and being sure that I got good coverage across all of the tentacles, it took me 10-15 minutes. And that part of why it's so much faster is you don't have to put in the effort with shading and layering paint afterwards, and that's because you've already done that in your initial stages when you didn't have to be as careful when you did your shade and your dry brush. So next up, I was going to try and demonstrate another way to use glazes, which is to correct blending issues on models that have already been painted. Like I've already done a dry brush and highlight on the kind of the skirting around this model, this Bombshell Miniatures Daughters of the Burning Rose. So now I'm going to try and mix up a glaze using the base tone that I used, like the mid-tone for those colors. And the idea is that I'll lay that down in a thin layer that's a glaze, and it'll help kind of even everything out and give it kind of a uniform overall tone. So the reason I say that I tried to do that with this is I ended up picking too bright of a green, and so it ends up working like it's supposed to as far as the consistency, which is why I'm showing it. So I'm just mixing my paint from the pot with a little bit of the flow improver and then some of the matte medium, and I'm using the same way to test that I did before, and I'm just mixing it up to that same perfect consistency where it'll soak into the paper towel but not run like water on the palette. So that's where I'm trying to get to here. But where I messed up, like I said, is the tone of the green is too bright. So while it works as far as the flow and everything goes, it ends up leaving some pooling in some areas that I don't like, and I end up having to go back over it and correct it. Now, as I was painting this on, I noticed that the green was really bright, so I tried to make sure that I pulled away all of the pools where the paint was starting to collect in an attempt to keep it from kind of, I don't know, it ended up giving almost like a weird oozy effect where it looked like there was something like liquid and damp sticking to the cloth, which is totally not the tone I was going for. So I go ahead and I continue, and I do this all the way around just to keep it uniform, but I have to really pay attention and go back and pull those pools off, and it doesn't end up working out very well for me. And after that, I still wasn't satisfied. It looked really splotchy, and there were still some areas on the model which were the really bright, vibrant green from the too bright mid-tone that I tried to glaze over it. So what I've done here is I've just got green tone ink from Army Painter, which is one of their quick shades, and I am going back over the whole thing with this. I tend to focus it more in the areas where the lighter, brighter green pooled more than I wanted it to. And now I'm just kind of dripping this into those areas that are really bad, so it kind of pools there and darkens those back down and blends them back into everything else. I did paint the entire green surface with this shade just so it kind of blends it all in and ties it together too. But this is where I really wanted to show that everybody makes mistakes, and striving for perfection is folly, but you should always strive to be better. So just focus on correcting where you've made mistakes and go back and fix it when you can. Learn from your mistakes, move on. There's no point in dwelling on it. After the touch-up, it looks a lot better. The green's a lot more even. And while off camera, I went ahead and finished painting up all these models. I really am happy with the results after this, trying this painting technique on them. I used the same technique to do the brains, which is how I got kind of the mottled, well-shaded pinkish red color that I wanted for them, and I think it turned out really nicely. I did that all the way across every model. The only thing that I went back and did after filming was I added a touch of green tone underneath all the tentacles to kind of make the suction cups on the undersides of the tentacles show up better. And once that was done, I was really satisfied with how these models turned out, and I'll be showing them off in a finished product video after I get them basted another time. But hopefully this all helped. It's a really fun technique. It takes a little bit of effort to learn the right consistency of the paint that you're going for in order to actually use it as a glaze. But once you get that nailed, it's a really quick, really easy way to paint a lot of models in a hurry, especially if there are lots of organic shapes. I would use this if I were doing like barbarian hordes, a lot of goblins in a fantasy setting, more of these Edofleini. I'm going to do the same thing on the next batch I order when I get around to that. I really like these guys. I need like 3 or 4 models for them to be a complete S.E.E.R roster because I'm running them as a low-tech faction, so they're going to have more bodies available. And I think that'll add to it too, because that'll give them more of the pulp sci-fi alien horde invading, and I think that'll give it a nice feel. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. This is the last of the hobby videos that I'll be doing for a little while. Next month I'm going to be focusing more on finishing the Koban build and a couple other terrain pieces, and I'm gonna cut back to 1 video a week instead of the 2. I'm just having a hard time keeping up with the 2 videos a week, and I'm out of these hobby tips that I wanted to squeeze out in a hurry. So I want to spend some more time focusing on bigger projects while still keeping the quality of my videos pretty high. So after that, hopefully you guys like this. Like I said, if you did, be sure to give it a like, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell notification if you want to get a few more hobby tips that are coming up down the road, and as well as keeping up with our terrain videos. Thanks again for watching. If you want, check out the model companies that I mentioned here in the video, both Bombshell Miniatures and Anvil Industries. Those links will be in the description below, as well as Amazon affiliate links to all of the equipment used in the video. If you guys want to support us, that's a great way to buy the things you need for your hobby while still, you know, when you buy something, you pay the same price and it kicks back a little bit to us, and it's no additional charge to you, but it's a great way to support the channel. You can also support us at Patreon and buy me a coffee. Links will be in the description below for those as well. You can keep up with our day-to-day going-ons at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links to all those will be in the description. And thank you again. And remember, at the Clock Tower, it's always game time.